Okay, so in this demonstration, I want to show you how you can use the Google Chrome Inspector. This is just sort of a demonstration test page that I've set up. So you can just go to this and mess around with it if you want. And you can follow along and try to do what I'm doing. So first thing I want to show you is let's right click in Google Chrome and you would go to Inspect. And what it's going to do is open up this inspector, and hopefully you've already watched the really simple version of me showing you the inspector, because there is a simpler version, for a video. And you can visit that page. It should pop up here as a link. Anyway, so I'm not going to go over all of the stuff that I went over in the last video explicitly. I'll sort of go over them as I come across those issues. But you'll notice over here we've got the HTML. And right now it's kind of small, so what I'm going to do is, while I've clicked inside of this Chrome area, if you need to make it larger, you can hold down the Command plus key on a Mac or Control plus on Windows, and you see that it actually gets a little bit bigger, so it's easier for you to see. If you get it too big, then it kind of makes everything really difficult to fit in the window properly, so I'll go down one more version just so it's kind of a little bit larger for you to see in the video. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to twirl down the body tag, and you'll see that we've got all this stuff, right, that I've put in here, and this is just a demo page. So if I had actually inspected somewhere that wasn't just in this general area, but let's say I inspected this exact box, so I'll right click on the box and say inspect, you see that it jumps immediately to it over in the HTML, which is great. And then I can twirl that down and see what kinds of stuff I have inside of it. And then you'll notice as I'm hovering in the HTML view on the right, you'll notice that on the left, it's highlighting those things. And if you're wondering what the colors are that it's using for highlight, you can come down here in the right-hand bottom corner, and you might have to scroll to find it, right? But it's got the color panel guide, or the legend, for what it uses colors for. So for instance, orange, this light orange is a margin. It's showing where the margin of a selected element is. The border is going to be kind of a pale yellow. If a border does exist, then it will show it as a sort of pale yellow overlay, which means sometimes, like if it's a black border, that means that the overlay is going to sort of be like a mustardy kind of brown color. Padding will show up in green, and you see that this element, for instance, on the left has no padding because nothing is popping up. And then also then is the actual size of the element, and it sort of gives it a blue overlay. So if I come back up here and I kind of hover over these things, you see that whenever I hover over the entire div that has an ID of container assigned to it, you can see that it has margins. And if you look down in the bottom right, down here, you see that it's showing what the calculated or rendered numeric value is. That doesn't mean that that's what we have assigned it in the CSS. You can see what the assignments are in the CSS over here on the left. This just showing what the current calculation is based on the viewport size, right? So you can see it changes as I modify the viewport. It's going based off of pixels, basically, all right? So with that being said, let's look at how we can start to monkey around with this and do some fun stuff. So if you look at this, for instance, div 1, and I click on it, you notice that the styles down here changed. Well, what's happening is that the styles that are down below are actually the rendered styles that are being shown on the screen. These are the styles that are actually making this element look the way that it looks right now. And what's really cool is that you can change these things interactively, right? So I could, for instance, take off the background color, and you see that the background color, that pink color, kind of goes away. I could change the margin, and you see that because it had automatic margins, it was automatically centering it on the between the left and right margins, right? So if I can put that back on, width, if I want to remove where it says 100 pixels, what it's going to do is automatically take up the full amount that it can take up, because a div, remember this is div, is a block level element. So I'm going to turn the width back on, and then of course the height, right? The height is only, it's only making it as tall as it needs to be because it's actually, it only has as much text here is it needs to have, and so it just ends the div, right? But if I give it a fixed height, then no matter how much content I have in there, it will be that particular height, right? So these are just some little things that you learn as you mess around with it, and this is how you actually learn, is that you start to fool around with this interactively. Okay, so that's all pretty normal stuff. Let's look at positioning. That's kind of what we're here to do. This is kind of our goal, to mess around with this. And you can do this at a really low stakes way. This is not an important thing where you have to go copy the files and save it somewhere. This is just a play, okay? But I do want you to remember that anything you do here, right, anything you do is not actually going to be saved in the original file. This is just temporary, real-time experimentation, and whatever you do here, as soon as you refresh the page or close the page, or if there were a link on this page that you accidentally clicked, for instance, you would lose everything that you had done. If you are on a computer that has a trackpad, this is really, really, really important, especially on an Apple computer. If you're on a trackpad where if you start to swipe to the left or to the right in Google Chrome, sometimes it will automatically try to go back a page or forwards a page if you've already visited other pages. So you need to be very, very careful, because you can accidentally lose all the stuff that you've done. Now, that's why this low stakes practice stuff is so useful. I will tell you that I use this all the time for high stakes stuff, where I spend a lot of time messing around with it, and I'm also very, very careful, for instance, not to refresh the page, because then I can go copy all the changes that I made and I can update my my file. And sometimes the other thing that's kind of good to do is to copy the changes that you make as you're making them, just in case you accidentally refresh the page. So all of those things being said, keep that in mind, all right, if you're actually doing something that matters, like on your assignments. Okay, so let's look at this. We've got a box 1 that says header. Let's say that we actually intend for that thing to be a header that kind of comes up here and goes 100%. And let's just play around with that. So first of all, right now it's static positioning because it doesn't have any position declaration here. It doesn't have any kind of position property. So remember, the default is static. That's also true of the container. If you notice here, we should actually just get rid of that. Okay, let's just get rid of that altogether. And you'll notice that I could interactively start to change these things, right? So container doesn't have a position, div whose ID is 1 doesn't have one, div whose ID is 2 doesn't have a position, right? So that's all well and good. Now let's go back to box 1, and we are going to make that sort of a header. So if you click down here, you can add, I'm going to add the property of position, and as I start typing, you see it wants to give me a tooltip and autocomplete, so I can use the right arrow to arrow over and it will complete it for me. And then if I click on the colon key, right, that's the 2 dots, not a semicolon, but it's the 2 dots, the colon key, then it will advance me into the property, or excuse me, into the value field. And so I want the position to be, let's say that I want it to be absolute. Let's see what happens if I do absolute. And I used my arrow down key to choose that. So I'm going to click on absolute. And automatically it did some wonky thing where it moved it over. Okay, now I want to tell it, I need to tell it its coordinates. So we need to tell it what its offset coordinates are. So let's say that we want it to be all the way up here in the top corner. So let's say we want it to be top 0, and remember, it's not margin top, it's just top, because margins aren't really gonna, they're not going to be useful whenever you pull something out of the document flow. So absolute and fixed things will pull something out of the document flow, and they won't pay attention to other things' margins, right? And other things won't interact with an absolute margin. So let's also now tell it to be left 0, and you see it goes to the top left of the viewport, right? Because remember, I told you that none of these other containers, the container and none of the other divs actually have positions. So that means that it needs to go all the way up to the top of the viewport for its basically for its parent position coordinates. All right, now what I can also do here is I can tell it, well, I want it to go all the way across. So we'll say width is 100%. You have to give it a unit of measure. The units of measure are important. So now it's, going all the way across, and because the original file has like an RGBA color value, you can kind of see through it, so you can see what's going on underneath it, right? And then, you know, that's kind of cool, right? And so if I scroll now, you see that it scrolls off the page. Well, what if I said I wanted to see what would happen if I make my container, let's click on container. What if I want that header to be a header of this containing box? What if I didn't actually want it to go to the top left of the viewport, for instance? We're just playing around right now, okay? So what I could do is I could go over here to its parent container. All right, so that's a div whose ID is container. And I could give that a position of relative. And watch what'll happen. See what happened to that absolute header box? The header box automatically said, oh, my parent is relative, so I have to obey my parent. And that means that it's going to go to the top left 0 coordinates of its parent container. And what's kind of cool about that is that as that box moves around on the page, then so is the header constrained to that box. Okay, that's kind of cool, right? So, well, now what I have decided is, okay, well, I don't really want that header actually to be part of the box, but but the thing is there's this watermark underneath it. Maybe I want the watermark to be contained down here. Maybe it's a watermark on top of an image file or something. Okay, so let's look at the watermark really quickly. So if we go to div ID 2, I'm going to move this over so I can see more. What I can do is I can also go ahead and give this a position. Let's do that of absolute. All right, so absolute positioning. And you see that it goes to the top left coordinates automatically of its parent container because its parent is relative. So I actually want it to go to the bottom 0. Let's just, yeah, so bottom 0 and let's say right 0. So I want the watermark to be in the bottom right corner. Okay, and now what that really means is that if I want this div ID2 to be absolute and in the bottom right corner of its parent container, then that means I have to leave the container ID at a relative position. So what does that leave me for this header? I don't want it to stay up here. I actually really wanted it to be at the very top. Well, the thing about the position absolute is that, because it will obey its relative parent container, what we might want to do instead is make it fixed, because fixed positioning does not obey relative container parents or ancestors, okay? So now also notice what happens whenever I scroll. No longer is that header scrolling with the page, it's fixed. So that's kind of cool, because then it could be like navigation or something, or it could just be the title of the page that's always supposed to stay there. All right, now something else that you'll notice is that as I scroll up, look what happens with that watermark. It kind of like goes over the header. That could be cool if I was trying to do some kind of artsy thing, right? But that's not what I'm trying to do. I really just want the watermark to stay on top of whatever is in that container. So what we need to do is apply z-index. All right, and the z-index is going to be very important. Let's go ahead and actually let's go here to the 2, and we can give it a low z-index. So let's say z-index of, I don't know, like 10. And then maybe for the 1 div, we can give it a z-index of like 100, and it can go all the way up to 999. Okay, now let's see what happens, and there it goes right underneath. All right, so in the next demonstration, I'm going to show you how you can deal with making this margin so that it's okay, how you can edit HTML, how you can do a lot of really cool stuff with this watermark, and so forth.